A constant topic for us in the Watch YouTube community is talking to you about how to collecting strategies, that sort of thing. I'm no different. I'm no better than any other YouTuber. I'm happy to suck at that teat as well. And so last week I started my watch collecting series, talking about the 3 essential rules of watch collecting. I'm going to continue that today. Slightly different. This is going to be less theoretical. This is going to be more practical, if you want, talking about the best and worst advice that we get as we start off on the watch collecting journey. Giving that to you and then putting a bit of commentary around it so that perhaps you're better placed to listen to this advice, disregard the stuff that's terrible, and maybe get some value out of the stuff that's not too bad. After the intro, we'll get into it. Hi, I'm Pete McConville. Welcome to my channel where I overthink, overanalyze, and just basically geek out on watches far more than they deserve, but I do it anyway. And this is another one of my series on how to be a better watch collector, if you like. And what I want to do today is talk about some of the best and worst advice going out and about. And this is a great sort of follow-up to my first video, which you should go watch. But very quickly, in that first video, I spoke about the 3 most important rules for watch collecting. And those are: know who you are, don't get carried away, do everything in moderation. And 3, don't be too certain that you know everything you need to know. Always be ready to learn new things. They're the 3 big rules. And it was good that I did those first, because if you've done those things, particularly that first one of know who you are, know what you're into, know what you're likely to collect, how you're likely to collect, how you're likely to appreciate watches, then you're far better placed to deal with the deluge of good and bad advice you're going to get. So let's kick off with a great example of advice that can be good or bad depending on who you are. I'm going to have to look away from the screen because I do have to read these. So this is from Al Knows Nothing, who says, always buy box and papers. Simultaneously the best and worst advice you ever get. Sometimes it's essential. Sometimes it's a total waste of money. They can be faked, but they can also be validated. And Al is exactly right. For a certain type of collector, particularly for people who like to flip, or people who are it's very important that they have like the whole set, then box and papers is absolutely essential. On the other hand, for someone like me, I'm not really that fussed in the ephemera around a watch, and I buy every watch assuming I'm never going to sell it. Then for me, buying box and papers is just a flat out waste of money. I actively avoid those watches because invariably I'm paying for something I don't value. The idea of buying box and papers was followed up by a bunch of people talking about a very similar and related issue, characterized by David St. here. Always buy a watch on the bracelet. It can be the least helpful advice ever because, with a few exceptions, he always likes his watches on rubber or leather anyway. Someone else followed up something very similar. The Brendonian, always buy a watch on the bracelet, and he's had mixed results. He likes some of his watches on bracelets, but others he tends to wear them on leather or rubber too. I'm in exactly the same boat. For me, actually, that's not true. For me, this is always bad advice. I don't like bracelets. The only reason I would buy a bracelet is for resale value later, but then I don't sell watches either. So I sat down one day and worked out how much money I have saved not buying the bracelet, and it's well north of $10,000. But for other people who do love bracelets, people who are probably going to spend that money anyway, it's great advice. Another fantastic example of knowing who you are. The same piece of advice could be great or terrible. Type B Flieger came in. He's the only one who said this, which is a little bit surprising. Do your due diligence on a watch before you buy it and buy the seller. Hey, you know what? This is kind of unambiguously good. I can't think of an example where, learning about a watch first and trying to do some research about the seller and figure out that they're someone to be trusted. I don't know if that can ever be bad. If someone can give me an example of where that would be bad advice, please do in the comments. But no, type B, you nailed it. I think that one's unambiguously good. Okay, so TJ Watch Guy has led off with something which I think is always bad advice. And by the way, we're about to see a bunch of other people follow up on TJ here. So the least valuable advice is anything that starts with everyone needs to have and insert something here. Have a Speedmaster, have a Rolex, have a G-Shock. It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what they put in that gap. It is always bad advice. TJ, as I said, was not on his own here. Times Romano said the worst advice, everyone has to own a Speedy at least once. He was very much more specific, was Roman, but he's absolutely right. Sandwich Time Channel followed up with the idea of buy the icons, the combined arbitrary notion of the perfect 3-watch collection, and you end up with a Submariner, Speedmaster, and G-Shock. Yawn. And I think finally, I don't think there's another one after this, Maritimer in 1971 said the same thing. You have to have X in your collection, whatever that is. Just as the previous advice from Type B Flieger, to always do your due diligence on a watch and buy the seller, I think that's always good. I think the idea of telling any one person that they have to have certain watches or certain things in their collection is always bad. I can't think of an example where that's a good thing. I think that we are all individuals. We are all wildly different. We all have our own hopes and dreams and histories and futures. We all want different things. The idea that someone else can say, no, what you need to have is a Submariner and a Speedmaster and a G-Shock is just beyond the joke. It's just really bad advice. And the reason it's so dangerous is because when people are new to the hobby, that's the sort of thing they're desperately hoping for. They're desperately hoping for that person to tell them what would make a good collection. Never tell anyone any of those things. And if someone does say to you what you need is, just stop listening and run as fast as you can. Now, Wet Shutter said something interesting and something I hear a lot of people say, which is a watch needs to be worn and the wearing needs to be a delight. I can see that makes sense for some people. And again, I'm going to come back to this theme I keep hammering about knowing who you are so that you can assess whether the advice is any good for you or not. That is great advice for a person I call the wearer. And that is the person for whom wearing their watches is all important. I'm not that kind of collector. I'm a curator. I like to have a collection and I don't care that much if I don't wear my watches all that often. Likewise, I'm perfectly comfortable with, I've said this before, I'm perfectly comfortable with the idea that one of my watches might be like a pair of high heels. Great for a short period, makes a fantastic impression. You can pretty much pull it off during an event, but as soon as the event is over, the watch is off your wrist and in your pocket because it's just too painful. My JLC Master Compressor Diver falls into that category. Love that watch to bits. It's going nowhere. It looks $1 million. It is so painful after a couple of hours, but I don't care. Like a woman in high heels, I am so happy when I'm wearing that watch. Very happy when I take it off too. But when I'm wearing it and that first little bit, I love it to bits. So I get where Wet Shutter's coming from. And for a lot of people, that's great advice. But be careful because you don't have to collect that way and you don't have to wear your watches that way. Okay, so the next is an interesting one because off the bat, I'd agree with this one. So V Marsh says, don't buy it unless it's what you really want. And I'm on board with that. I don't I don't like the idea of buying and selling. I hate selling. I'm a collector. I buy everything thinking I'm going to have it forever. So yeah, I would never buy something unless I was really confident I wanted it. I think, yeah, Junior Johnson said something similar. Never settle for something else. If it's not what you really want, you'll never be satisfied. Again, I kind of go that way. And I say to myself, don't buy substitutes. If there's a watch you want, just wait for that watch. But Gratuitous EDC has that same kind of idea in his mind as the worst advice ever. He says, worst advice, while seeking advice about a homage, doesn't have to be a homage, could be any kind of substitute watch, just save for the one you want. He says, if I could save for the one I want, don't you think he would do that? Single father with Aston Martin taste and a Toyota budget. And you know what? He's not wrong either. It's all very well to say, just wait for the watch you want, just keep on working. But that could be utterly unrealistic. That could be something that you never get to. Now, there could be alternatives and say, don't find a substitute, find an alternative, find something different that not acts instead of the Submariner you really wanted, but actually scratches a completely different itch. But that's getting a bit philosophical, and that's a topic for another day. I think both of those cases are true. And again, I'm going to keep harping on about it. Yet another example where it's really important for each of us to know, who are we? What can we afford? Can we wait? Can we find that thing which is completely different, scratches a completely different itch, and leave that unrequited love alone? Or are we like Gratuitous EDC? And he's not wrong. Are we saying, no, that's the design I want. I'm never going to be able to get there, or the cost will be simply too high. I'm going to go with a substitute. Neither is wrong. Neither is necessarily right. It all depends on who you are. I'm a Watch Freak had some interesting advice. Just buy one watch per big brand. Never repeat the brands. They're always old grandpas. Now, I don't know what that last bit means. And I don't know whether he's necessarily saying this was good advice or bad advice. And maybe this is yet another one where, depending on who you are and what you collect and how you go, this could be great advice or it could be absolutely terrible. Personally, I ignore this. I tend to be a brand guy, not a one brand guy, but I tend to go with Seiko's, Alpinas, Breitling's, and a couple of other brands around it. The idea of opening up a box and having 20 different watches, 20 different brands, 20 discordant stories doesn't fill me with joy at all. But other people may love it. Okay, so Jay Burgess had some interesting and off-piste advice, but not wrong, where he actually transported it from Oral Backs, I think you say his name, auctioneer at Phillips. This is principally talking about vintage watches. Be ready to pay 10 to 20% premium to get the best condition you can. You know what? I think this is probably right. Be careful, because I do buy a lot of vintage, and I have found that 10 to 20% premium can turn into 50 to 100% if you go searching those perfect unicorns. But you know what? I would agree with this. If I'm looking at a watch that's $5,000 and I can find a watch which is in remarkably better condition for $6,000, pay that extra 20%, get the better condition every single time. I think that's always good advice. Okay, so we're struggling here. Says, best advice, you only need to worry about resale value if you sell watches. Choose wisely, never be an issue. For me, we're struggling, great advice. I'm a said it 1,000 times. I'm a one and done. If I spend my money, I've set it on fire. I don't like selling kind of guy. So yeah, I don't worry about resale value. But very good friend of mine, just as good a collector as me, just as serious, probably more so. He is an inveterate flipper. Watches come in, watches go out, and he has to worry a little bit about resale value, certainly more than I do. Otherwise, the way he does the hobby, the way he enjoys it, kind of grinds to a halt. So I wouldn't say, I'm not going to be one of these guys who says, don't worry about resale value. I think if you're the kind of collector that will buy and sell, that wants that constant motion of your watches, then yeah, you do have to worry about resale value. Or you can find your time in the hobby remarkably short and painful. But on the other hand, if that's not you, we're struggling, you're absolutely right. Resale value, someone else's problem. Close run thing, similar sort of argument from Jacob Kalkman. Most helpful advice for him, safe. I think he meant save. Save for a watch that holds its value a bit better instead of buying 10 cheaper watches. Never know if you need to sell. Now, I don't agree with that. I don't think that's, again, this idea of kind of hedging your bets, of compromising the watch that you might really want for resale value or your ability to have a lifeboat later. Hey, you know what? This is a hobby. This is a luxury. Consider the money spent as being set on fire and scattered to the four winds. And none of this is helpful. That's how I approach the hobby. But on the other hand, I know not everyone else does. And maybe Jacob's advice is great for you. Who can tell? The next piece of advice is really interesting. How do I say this name? Adokandish, his watch. Whoever this guy is, we'll just say a doc. Actually, that's probably it. A doc in his watch. Oh, yeah, of course. Okay, so from a doc in his watch, it brings up two from Archie Luxury. I hardly ever talk about Archie anymore. I used to a while ago. I get the feeling not many people talk about Archie anymore. He's kind of dropped off the radar. Or maybe I've just managed to master the algorithm and like Neo controlling the Matrix. I just don't have to deal with this anymore. But Archie's here. Two pieces of his advice have been transferred. And a doc in his watch has said the best advice is don't buy any shitters. And the worst advice is that it has to hurt when you buy something. I would say exactly the opposite. I think the worst advice Archie has ever given, the worst thing Archie ever did for the watch community was popularize the term shitter. By the way, normally this was a quote this comment came up on my Instagram because the word shitter, I hate it so much. It's actually one of the banned words in my little YouTube thing. If you use that as a comment, your comment won't turn up. I hate the whole concept that there are watches not worth owning by anyone. That just flies in the face of everything my channel and this hobby means to me. However, the second thing that a doc and a watch has quoted from Archie Luxury, curiously, I actually kind of agree with. And that is that the idea that a watch has to hurt, that there's got to be some struggle, some pain in getting a watch. Otherwise, it's not worth it. There's actually a fair bit of psychology to show that it is pain and effort and striving that creates meaning, that the thing that makes anything mean something to us is forcing through some kind of pain. Now, there's really important riders on that. The pain has to be something that you've chosen to endure, not something that's imposed on you. There's a difference between pain and suffering. But if, for example, you choose to buy a watch that is very expensive, that really pushes you, and you choose to put the money aside, and you do have to take the pain a bit for a little while, going without so that you can get that watch. Science would say that at the end of that process, having gone through that pain that you imposed upon yourself, the meaning invested in what comes next is going to be so much greater than if you had just gone up and bought something much cheaper that you didn't really feel very much. On the other hand, if you push yourself beyond the limit, if on the other hand something is imposed on you, you do not like the idea of having to interact with other people and schmooze and network and develop a relationship. If that is something you would really hate to do, but it's imposed on you, that's not pain that adds meaning. That is suffering that causes long-term stress, and you're going to hate whatever you get at the end of it. So you do need to take this one carefully, but you know what? I actually think Archie's onto something with that one. Okay, so the next one from Watch Hunter blog, great. He basically just rephrased my rule number 2. Most helpful advice, take your time and try it if you can before you buy it. Actually, that's rule number 2 about everything in moderation, and try it before you buy it is probably rule number 3. Don't be too certain of what you know. Always check things out. I think those are almost unambiguously good pieces of advice. The reason I say almost is because in some circumstances, you don't get the choice to wait. And in some circumstances, a lot of us don't get to try watches before we buy them. So I think that's a good ambition. I think Watch Hunter's onto something that you would like to do if you can. But bear in mind, sometimes you're just not going to be able to. Okay, so we're about to start a run of advice that I absolutely despise, but some people quite literally live their hobby by. I'm going to start with Zarko999, who says the most helpful advice: buy what you like without reference to trends. You know what? We'll go through the whole buy what you like stuff in a little bit. The second bit, his least helpful advice, I actually do agree with completely. Having something described as a superb value proposition is up there with she's got a really nice personality. A superb value proposition is basically saying this is a watch you probably wouldn't want to buy, but it's cheap. I think that's just red rag to a bull. I don't like the idea of value at all in a luxury good. And the idea that you would buy a luxury because it's a value proposition just screams compromise to me. Maybe that suits some people, but personally, I think that's always bad advice. But anyway, let's get back to this first one about buy what you like, because this is very popular. Inked Wrist Shot said the same thing. Ignore the hype, wear what you like. I gave myself that advice, laughing around. Mark Playford said the same thing. No one else gives a shit. Buy what you like. All sounds fine. And this is really well-meaning. I know this advice. I don't get angry at people that say this too much because I know it's coming from a good place. I know they're trying to make someone happy. But Tennessee Mike really summed up why this is bad advice. Tennessee Mike nailed it when he said, it's a cliche and it lacks any substance. It lacks any help. If anyone comes to you asking a question, it's because they don't know the answer. So someone comes to you and says, I'm not sure what to buy. They're after help. They're after someone to give them a helping hand moving them forward. And telling them to buy what they like is as useful as tits on a bull because it's pretty evident they don't know what they like. That's why they're coming to you. So telling anyone to buy what they like is really pointless. But there's something else about the whole buy what you like fascism I don't like. And that is, inherent in that is the idea that you're not allowed to buy a watch that's going to be popular. You're not allowed to buy a watch because it's going to have, get you a lot of likes on Instagram. You're not allowed to buy a watch because it's going to impress people at the next red bar. And I think that is just as bullshitty as telling someone that they have to buy a watch that's got status or that's got some sort of cachet. We all collect differently. It is perfectly valid. Humans are social creatures. We are constantly trying to place ourselves in our environments, and that includes the people around us. You know what? If someone wants to buy a watch and they're asking you which one's going to get the most likes on Facebook, then you know what? The watch they're going to like the most, the watch they want, is the one that's going to get them the most clicks. Help them out and tell them. But this whole cliche of buy what you like and don't think about anyone else is just at best, just a cliche that doesn't help. And at worst, actively misdirects people against watches that they actually would make them happy. But I want to close on something which I think is in fact unambiguously good, and advice which I think we should all take to heart. And in fact, I'm going to do a video specifically on this. So thanks, Mike, for reminding me. The best advice is that it's not really about the watches at all. The best thing about this hobby, and the thing to bear in mind, is actually using the watches as a bridge to between us as people. Using the watches as, there's an expression, the third thing that joins you and another person in your gaze at artwork, cinema, or in our case, a watch. It's the community that grows up. It's the way we talk to each other. That's the best thing about watches. And concentrating on that and letting a lot of the other stuff go is always great advice. So thank you very much for that one, Mike. And there's a reason I put you last, because I wanted to finish with that. So anyway, that's some of the best advice and worst advice you gave me. I found it fascinating that it was a coin toss. The same piece of advice, coin toss, whether that was good or bad. And I'll keep coming back to it and I'll hammer this point home. Really important to know who you are before you seek and take and listen to advice. Because if you don't know what you want, then it is very easy. There is a plethora of people who are more than happy to blow you 1,000 miles off course. Anyway, I've been Pete McConville. This is what I do. If you like it, hit the like, subscribe, notification, bell, all that stuff. And we'll see each other later. Bye.